Thank you for joining us today. My name is Nicholas O'Brien, and I'll be hosting this session's talk. Um, we're here today with Roger Matthews to give a talk called From Stanley Parable to Severance, the Growing Influence of Games on Pop Culture. And I won't be doing any kind of preamble or anything like that, but I will be facilitating any conversation that's happening on Discord. So without any further ado, Roger, take it away.
All right, thank you. Thanks everyone for coming today. Hopefully this will be as fun for me and everyone to talk about because this is something I've been thinking about for years. When I first read that Dan Erickson, the showrunner and writer for Severance, talked about how he was influenced by the Stanley Parable, amongst other things, for working on Severance. And it just really struck me because I don't really hear about like prestige TV talking about indie games that and so kind of made me think about looking back at my own childhood of looking at like 90s adaptations of video games that they're kind of financial and critical failures at first. Like for those who don't recognize that, that was the Mario Brothers movie from the 90s that was failed critically, financially. I think the actors said they were drunk on set and they just were miserable. It didn't go very well. But we're looking at now today where we've had adaptations for decades, some of them very successful commercially or get good reviews, but I think we're kind of starting to see a different era a little bit where it's like not seeing games adaptations, but just games just sort of this joining forces and like merging with TV and film in a way where like we're starting to see like a prestige TV, where it's like stuff that actually is making a cultural resonance beyond like, oh, it's an adaptation. It's like they're standing on their own merits because there's like a deeper integration, I think, over time, as like just games are just part of our culture. So, but before I get into all that, I just want to talk about who I am. I work in the TV and film industry. I grew up on 90s era narrative games, kind of played everything that I could get my hands on. And I was just like, I didn't really see a difference growing up between making I used Quake to make Quake movies, which later became known as machinima, or making short films on my computer. Like I was using the same computer, and whether it was my video camera, I was using my mouse and keyboard in Quake to use that as a camera. Like it just like I was just making stuff. And I was just a kid who wanted to make things, and that's I didn't really care whether it was like a movie or it was a game or it was just like story, and I just liked story. And that kind of through line is still there, where I use Unreal Engine today for working in the TV and film industry. There's like a merging going on there. So it's just like I don't know. I really find this kind of these merging and intersections really interesting. But I think it's been a really rough few decades of I mean, Roger Ebert, he in 2000, he was really on it early on, talking about machinima. He was very cranky about it also. He was like, oh, these kids are just going to make these derivative, nothing is good going to come of machinima. And machinima wasn't a huge thing, so he was partially right, but he was also a little bit cranky. And he kept on getting crankier. Then in 2005, he's like, to my knowledge, no one or out of the film field has ever been able to cite a game worthy of comparison with the great dramatists, poets, filmmakers, novelists, and composers. So he's not just like making these academic distinctions. He's cranky. He's not. He's not. He's like he's a little dismissive of this stuff. And then everyone gets mad at him. You might have read this stuff in some degree, but uh, he then tries to be a little more academic and says, well, an obvious difference between art and games is that you can win a game that has rules, points, objectives, and an outcome. Whereas some people now might cite an immersive game without points or rules, but then I would say it ceases to be a game, which is, well, I'm sorry, Roger Ebert, but Stanley Parable is listed as an indie game. It has indie game all over, and it has no rules, it has no point, it has no traditional game structures in it. So I think what's interesting over time is that like these like academic distinctions, like what's a game, what's not a game, what's a film, it's like it doesn't really matter after a certain point. We're just like telling stories and we're just like engaging with people. And so I think that, it's just more a matter of like what is resonating. And so it brings us to now today, when or not today, but the last few years where now Dan Erickson has cited the Stanley Parable and also the Backrooms, which is not a game per se, but has a lot of interactive storytelling to it, that I will get into later. And it's an Emmy award-winning TV show, and he is listing it side by side with critically acclaimed films like Brazil, being John Malkovich, and so that means like Terry Gilliam and Charlie Kaufman, people who are like inspiring people. They want to be filmmakers or writers because of these people. He's like, yeah, Stanley Parable, these guys. It's all like all the, and he's not even distinguishing with the Backrooms. Like that's cool too. You know, it's like there's no he's not really looking at it like these are my game influences, these are my film influences. They're just he's just seeing it all as like a potentials for a story, a narrative. So that's a lot of ground I kind of just jumped over. So I want to be a little bit more specific about like what I want to talk about. So I want to talk about how why is Severance using games structure, and like how it uses it, and specifically how it kind of uses game mechanics as metaphors for helping to tell the show's story. So I'm going to start off first with just specifically subversive game structures, and this with the Stanley Parable. It started off, it was kind of, it was put in this very subversive mold. It was started off as a free Half-Life 2 mod, 2 years before the commercial version. It had this endless open-ended structure. It encouraged disobedience and exploration. And the story is treated as it's not as like there's no plot, there's just a game system. And it's like it's a mechanic. You attempt to hack, you test to rewrite it. Obviously, there are finite choices, but it's more that like emotional feeling of you're trying to rebel against the system, or you're encouraged to rebel against the system. Um, and so, but I think what's interesting about that is that that original version of Stanley Parable, it's kind of, but it's also already sort of like being like there's this lineage of subversiveness, because he's taking the Half-Life 2 assets. The top is Half-Life 2, a character using the controls, and below is the original Stanley Parable, where he's it's the same assets basically, but now he's taking away the gameplay, and he's just doing his own thing with it. But it's still there's that narrative embedded in Half-Life 2 of the alien race controlling the humans, and the humans rebelling against these aliens trying to control their minds. So there's like these narrative like starting points that are sort of influencing that. And so you might not have seen that version, but this is the 2013 commercial remake. There's all original art, William Pugh as the level designer, and that is the aesthetic that you might recognize if you've seen Severance. It's that retro uh, aesthetic that is clearly an influence. So next up is the Backrooms, which I've kind of skipped over a little bit, explaining. If you don't know what creepypasta is, it's a creepypasta, which is like it's collaborative fiction where you're hacking and speed running. These kind of gamey ideas are taking life in like this narrative of someone who flips out of bounds in real life. And this idea of like, what if you just hacked real life and you were suddenly in this alternate dimension that doesn't, like it's broken, or there's like there's no textures in real life, or like all these crazy horrific things of looping corridors, like existential dread because you can't get out most of the time in most of these stories. You're just stuck there. And the aesthetic is also, I think it's shaped by the Half-Life 2 mods from that earlier period as well, because if you look at the Backrooms aesthetic, which has been recreated by various people, it looks very similar. Like that's a Gary's mod map from Half-Life 2. A lot of like these open, multiplayer maps weren't meant for they're meant for running around for multiplayer. So I think there was like something that I think there's some sort of connection there that people seem to resonate with, of like this kind of these creepy open endless rooms that have like a sort of video game equality to them, even though the Backrooms is never citing that specifically. There's a video game equality, and there's also this I think it's like this sort of this collaborative storytelling part that I mentioned, that someone made a YouTube video and Reddit post that about clipping out of bounds in real life. Then on 4chan, someone's like, "Hey, this is a creepy image," and someone else kind of says, "Hey, this is no clipping in the backroom stuff." Then they start to build this mythology on 4chan, and it becomes a collaborative storytelling. And now there are 1,362 pages on the Backrooms wiki of just there are just lots of different changes and additions, and I kind of see this as like modding in a sense, because there's the premise of the like you're clipping out of bounds and all these things, but people are adding levels and lore and rules, and they're still thinking in gameplay terms, even though there's not a game per se. And one version is one person's is now becoming a feature film for A24. And so there's this again like this intersection between mediums there. So kind of the unifying thread, I think, is that the Stanley Parable and the Backrooms, I think they both treat story and space as malleable. And playing a game in unattended ways, like modding, hacking, becomes like this interactive narrative focus that it's kind of it's playing with these things that you weren't meant to do in games and building on that, like that gamer vocabulary. And I'm gonna play a video here. Building on that, then also when Dan Erickson mentioned that Stanley Parable was influenced by Severance, in a similar like collaborative storytelling, people started then editing together the Stanley Parable trailer and Severance clips and making like their own hybrid story of combining those two. So like I'm going to play one example of that.
This is a story of a man named Stanley. Stanley worked for a company in a big building where he was employee number 427. Employee number 427's job was simple. He sat at his desk in room 427 and he pushed buttons on a keyboard. Orders came to him through a monitor on his desk, telling him what buttons to push, how long to push them, and in what order. This is what employee 427 did every day of every month of every year. And although others might have considered it soul-ripping, Stanley relished every moment of the orders he did, as though he had been made exactly this job. One day, something very peculiar happened. Something that would forever change Stanley. Something he would never like. Stanley walked straight ahead through the large door and he stared into the bilateral once again. It's rather an indication of Stanley walked upstairs to the next line. Stanley didn't look at that. Stanley certainly left her and Stanley slashed her with emotions. Stanley's obsession with the sensitivity of father. Oh, come now. You don't want to end already, do you? Why don't we begin again? Wait, how did you do that?
And just to be clear, that is not Stanley Parable or Severance. For those who haven't seen either, that is a combination. And oh, let's get stuck here. I think I got it.
This is a story
Oops,
of a
sorry.
man.
The end is never the end. Sorry, can you help me with that?
Or integration.
Yeah.
Human content right there.
It is merging. So now we'll talk about so I talked about Stanley Parable and the Backrooms and these ideas of subversiveness and so I want to talk about like how does that tie into Severance? I think it's a little you can get a sense from that video, but in particular we'll focus on a few things. If you haven't seen the show as well. That this premise of Severance is that you have people who sever their brains, and they have in two versions of themselves. There's the innie version and the outie version. And the innie version is trapped inside like a backroom Stanley Parable-esque game-like maze. And the outie version is just living their life outside of that space. And the two have no understanding, like there's no communication between the two. They're just separate people in the same body. So the innies, they're sort of born into this office space as blank slates with no memories. Kind of similar to how a player, when you start a game, you have no idea what's going on. You're just thrust into it, and you kind of have to figure it out. And then the innies, when they're working on the server floor, their job is essentially like a weird mini game that is completely meaningless. It's abstract. There's just a bunch of numbers that they have to collect, and they throw them into those bins. And I know that's just a still, but like if you haven't seen the show, it's just basically that. Imagine doing that 9 to 5. You're throwing numbers around, but it's playing with that idea of big meaningless gameplay loops with when you take away win conditions. Like what does that mean? You just work 9 to 5 and you move numbers around. You don't know why. You don't know when it'll end. It just keeps on going. It's a little bit kind of terrifying in some ways. And then the office itself is like a looping map that they walk to the elevator at the end of their day, and then they just wait. Suddenly they just find themselves the next day reset back in the level in the same place. And now obviously the outie version is then walking around in the outside world, but then for the innie version, all they know is the office and the level reset that they experience. And similarly, they as a way of sort of making sense of this endless monotony and meaninglessness, they try to treat their world like a game environment, like a player would, where if you don't like something in a game, or you just something, you want to experiment, you want to test boundaries, you look for secrets, you try to break the system, you just they're operating as players essentially. And that process of them trying to, these characters trying to make sense of their confusing and meaningless office world, this leads to this very complex idea of that the Audis also join in on this weird hacking experience where they can realize they can gain access to their full brain, both the innie and outie versions, by essentially hacking or modifying their severed programming that they themselves put into their own head. And there's a whole bunch of plot for why they want to do that, but it's more like realizing, hey, I can hack my brain. That's really cool. What can I like? What am I missing? Like the sense of like these characters feel like they're missing something in their lives that lead them to these poking around and trying to modify these systems. And so, but also in keeping with the game, this process of reintegrating causes glitches, instability, and there's a conflict between the innie and outie because these still are separate people in the same person. And so, and true to the nature of like hacking or whatever, you get more power, you get more control, but also you have there's more chaos potentially as a result. And just to differentiate between, I just want to be clear, like how modding, is modding as intended, and then hacking is truly, when you were just causing chaos, which is more, I'd say, reintegration. But look, so there's these game connections again, this gameplay, we're talking about the gameplay connections, but what that matters is because I think that there's a narrative devices that are specific to these characters in the show and what their emotional states are. They experience scary numbers when they see certain numbers, they feel like this emotional, visceral feeling. They can't explain it, and they say, "Oh, these are scary numbers," and then they kind of find the right numbers and dump them in, and then they feel like a sense of relief, and they don't know why it's scary. They don't know why they feel better, and that kind of actually serves as a metaphor for the story of these innies that are sort of like these emotionally suppressed uh, versions of their outies that are like they are still in some way processing all these complex emotions of their outies, but they don't really have any understanding of what's going on. So they're just trying to regain control. And and also, these rules of that purpose, there's like this dehumanizing quality to it where they're trying to, by creating these innie versions of themselves, most of the characters are trying to escape some pain or trauma. Like the main character, his wife died, so he's trying to, basically shove his grief down. But instead of shoving his grief down, he dehumanizes this version of himself. Um, and so that exploration essentially becomes self-discovery, where the further the innies explore the hallways, the more they learn about their outies' hidden identities, and they learn a lot of the things that were told to them aren't really true as well. It's similar to Stanley Parable, where the narrator says a lot of things that are, he's an unreliable narrator, and the innies are being lied to and created, there's these narratives that are being crafted. So the only way for them to learn is to learn about themselves by exploring the hallways. And the hallways lead them to rooms, which empower them to have more control and agency, and which is like a similar a mechanic and metaphor in games where basic exploration, like walking simulators, where you're like Gone Home, or a lot of games like that where you're just gathering information to sort of gain resolution or catharsis to something that's unresolved. And so I think why this resonates is because I think these metaphors reflect how our real lives often feel. Like we're playing a game we didn't design, we have rules we can't see. So like modding, no clipping, glitching, recursive loops, these are the ways we try to find meaning, like in systems that we might find broken or confusing. So they're not just game actions, they're like expressions of hope, rebellion, self-discovery. We're all kind of trying to understand our world, to rewrite our narrative, maybe break free of invisible rules we can't really make sense out of. And it's a bit like broad over there, but I think there's that basic idea of just letting and finding empowerment through rebellion, and not maybe having the answer for why you're rebelling, but if something feels wrong, and then trying to like just see what happens if you try to challenge something. I think it's something that's very inherent to that. And so going forward, I kind of I talked a lot about Severance and Stanley Parable and Backrooms, but I think like the bigger picture that I'm finding interesting is how that these mediums are continuing to, I think, to film and TV and games are continuing to blur, and I think we're going to continue to get different work, and I'm not sure where it'll be or how, but I think there's just more opportunities. And I think that there's also the flip of Severance, where there's immortality, which it's incorporating film language in new ways, and it's combining film editing, media browsing, forensic analysis, and I can't really. I think it's best explaining immortality if you haven't, but it's basically you're discovering hidden narratives using these mechanics of using this ancient film projector and sort of discovering things inside of it. And so while it's there's a lot of full motion video games before immortality, it's still doing something new with new mechanics that are like kind of breathing new life into a genre that people would say were dying in the 90s as well, with basic point and click interactivity. And for myself personally, I mentioned that I was dabbling with dabbling with machinima in the 90s. Well, I'm basically using machinima techniques with Unreal Engine now for previs. I will, we've for my job, we'll use our Xbox controllers, and we'll just do the same thing I did and run around with the character. Then I set up the camera afterwards, and because it's fast. It's not doesn't look great, but it's a kind of a fun thing to do. And I think that I think there's Unreal Engine and game engines have been increasingly more becoming a part of filmmaking. It's been happening for a while, but I think it's really starting to continue to really just grow and evolve and become where and finally, I just think that what I'm really excited about is the precedent this sets for future adaptations. And Disco Elysium, I know, is technically in plans, but it's been a lot of years, so who knows? So it's more just like this idea of like what else can come of all these connections. And I think that there's a lot of financial constraints creatively with making things, but I think that the more opportunities to just to create and collaborate, like I grew up on the internet in the 90s, which was nothing like what you can do now with collaboration as well. There's just a lot more out there, and I think that I just think that's ultimately an interesting place to be. So I I'm Roger Matthews. That is my website, and yeah, so that is my talk on Stanley Parable and Severance. Thank you. So yeah, so
Thank you so much, Roger. We have some time for a Q&A, which is great. So nobody has mentioned anything in the chat yet for a Q&A, so I'll open it up to the floor here. And Roger, you can facilitate.
Sure.
Thank you so much for this talk. I am clinically insane about both the Stanley Parable and Severance
Awesome.
and Disco Elysium. So
Nice.
Thank you for bringing, and the Backrooms, thank you for bringing all of this together. I'm curious about the time scale and what is resonating and why it's resonating, especially because Stanley Parable 2011, 2013 ish, very kind of small, starts out as a very indie thing and then grows. 10 years later, same thing happens with Severance. It's released in 2022. Not many people know about it, and then all of a sudden it's this.
It really blew up this year. Yeah.
Especially with big name studios like A24 doing something with the Backrooms, A24 reportedly wanting to make an Elden Ring movie, like all of these, as this kind of move starts to include also like big AAA heavyweight studios.
Yeah.
Do you think that those studios will also try and take these same mechanics, or do you think that perchance because of their size and their motivation that something else might happen?
Do you think like major film and TV studios will take the mechanics?
Yeah.
I think that broadly, I think there is, to me, I get the sense there's a lot of interest in broadly doing that, because I think that my takeaway is that I feel like the superhero genre is starting to wane, and I think that there's a lot of interest in adapting franchises in general, and I think that whether you're literally adapting the franchise or you're tapping into these things that are clearly making a lot of money for people, I think there's just I think there definitely, I think that there's a gap for the new thing to replace stuff superhero-ish for that same kind of audience. So yeah. Yes.
Do you think that divide between high culture machinima versus low culture machinima. And what I mean by that is like you're doing previds for Ted Lasso here,
Yeah.
which is obviously high culture machinima, but they have Skibbity Toilet, which is so I don't think we should do that necessarily.
No,
Never
no.
made the
Never made not mainstream. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question and good point.
Sorry, Roger, could you repeat the question for the online?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So it's talking about like a high culture and low culture and role of machinima and how it's true that like machinima is still used and it's still a thing and it's so it's about distinguishing like so like what does that matter if it's high culture or low culture and
It's like
yeah yeah
very online.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of feel like I don't really I don't really feel like that distinction is necessarily like I think it's whatever is interesting because I feel like art projects also kind of they blur that line in general and so yeah I think that yeah definitely so sorry what's that
Oh, yeah, sorry, it was a similar question. Were you done answering?
yeah you can go ahead yeah
But it's along the same lines, like the movie industry tends to follow the money, unfortunately, right? And so
Yeah.
some of the video games movies that are being coming out are some good, some bad. But like, say
Mhm.
the Minecraft movie has made how much money? I'm sorry,
A lot.
right?
Gazillion.
Right, but that's not the kind of video game adaptation we're looking for
Right,
necessarily.
yeah.
What was it? The Borderland movie that was.
Oh,
yeah.
There's a lot of like.
Yeah.
Of the video games that are moving in the wrong direction of like, oh, we can make toys out of this.
Yeah, like the
how do we-
faithfulness, right?
How do we as an audience communicate to the studio? No, that's not what. Well, is there an agency that we can maybe appeal to?
Yeah.
Say, like, there's something really interesting about these stories, and it's not the toy that you can make out of it.
Yeah, well, so to restate the question is, like, how can we as an audience voice what we want in an adaptation? And I mean, the obvious answer is you don't go, but I think it's an unfortunate thing that I think that it's kind of hard to, I don't think we necessarily can control it, but I think it's more like, is it more like, can it be enough of an ecosystem where you have like those big cash grab, games, adaptations, also in the artsy ones, and like, so like, there's enough interest that it's like a whole ecosystem where like, I think those bigger ones can then be the entry point. So that's or just don't go. Yes.
I see a lot of kind of what you mentioned in the beginning of like creepypastas and stuff like that as kind of a form of online urban legends.
Yeah.
And I've always really been interested in the phenomenon of urban legends.
Mhm.
I'm curious if you, first of all, if you agree, if you feel like that, like this is like an online like version of urban legends. And second, I'm curious if you have any thoughts about why stuff that like more modern online urban legends experience commercialization to an extent that like your more traditional like Sasquatch, the old ghost that haunts the old
Yeah.
factory down the downtown or whatever, don't really experience that type of commercialization.
No, that's a really good question. And yeah, the question was about the role of like and the first of all, yeah, this whether I would consider the Backrooms as the sort of like this like these kinds of more old fashioned what was the word you used for urban legends? Yeah, like they are like urban legends that you used to pass down, more word of mouth, and now it's more on the internet, and I think it definitely is the connection there. And yeah, it kind of reminds me of the commercialization aspect of the. I didn't see it, but I heard like the Slender Man movie. I feel like that was kind of in the more commercialized front. Yeah, and it's like it is. I think it's hard to make that make that leap over there, and but I think that the from what I've seen of the A24 Backrooms, that seems like maybe like a something more a bit more positive, I guess.
We have a question for the Discord that I want to
Sure.
include here, and this might be our last question for the session. Do you see movies adapting the underlying tropes and mechanics of video games more, like Severance does so successfully, or like lit RPG genres do?
I guess I think it's kind of like the question is kind of similar, and I guess I would kind of similarly say that yeah, I think that I think there is probably would be more game mechanic usage, versus lit RPGs. I think I'm hard to say. I would say that simply, I think that there's just like an interest in these broad interests, I guess.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. That's going to end our.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.